alien theory. Thank you very much and good night. But the thing is, and by the way, I just wanted to give you a brief, quick, I forgot to mention that as a breakdown. After we're done, or after I'm done speaking, we're going to have about, 10 questions, Q&A, and then after that, we're going to have a meet and greet out in the hall where I will shake and take a picture with every single one of you. Nobody will leave. Okay, so I'm going to be here, so don't think I'm going to take off or anything. I will stay. So, my argument then is, if cargo cult behavior can happen like we have just seen in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and even in the 1970s, then why couldn't cargo cult behavior have been taking place on Earth 10,000 years ago in the past? And as we're about to discover tonight, it has. So all around the world, for example, here in India, we have these wonderful, wonderful paintings and murals and carvings of weird beings in the sky, either alone, flying like this, or like that, in like flying palaces. For example, here we have another carving from India, and I'm always accused that when I talk on Ancient Aliens on the show, I say, well, the ancient texts are telling us this, the ancient texts are telling us that, and I'm always accused that apparently I never give the sources of my quotations. And people simply do not understand television, because there's nothing more boring than somebody sitting there and reading a quote, and then and then we interpret it this way. Why do I sound like David Childress right now? I have no I love David. He's a good, close friend of mine. So he knows I do this. By the way, he doesn't even know he has an accent. Oh, I know an accent. So I apologize, but we're actually going to read a little bit tonight. Only a few slides, so not too much. But for example, in the Drona Parva, it says that formerly the valiant Asuras had in heaven 3 cities. Each of these cities was excellent and large. One was made of iron, another of silver, and a third of gold. The golden city belonged to Kamalaksha, the silver city to Tarakaksha, and the third made of iron has Vidyumalin for its lord. When, however, these 3 cities came together in the firmament, this is what it looked like, something like that. And the reason why there's an exclamation mark right here is because it doesn't say heaven. It doesn't say paradise. It says firmament. Now there are other texts in Hindu or in Sanskrit that do talk about that there's a realm that has to do with heaven or paradise. However, in the Mahabharata or the Drona Parva or any of the Vedic texts, it always talks that these chariots or these cities were seen in the firmament. Now the firmament is a physical place. Every time you look on the horizon, whatever is above, that's the firmament. So they were very clear in stating that what they saw was something physical and not something that they pulled out of thin air or from their imagination. And so these 3 cities that orbited the Earth a long time ago, this was the place where the quote-unquote gods, lowercase g, where they lived. And I'd like to interject real quick here that whenever I talk about gods, it's always lowercase g, and I'm going to repeat the following twice, that gods as we think of them today do not exist. Gods do not exist. What? What do you mean gods don't exist? Isn't that the whole thing of your theory? That, God's this and God's that? Yes. It is. But our ancestors thought whom they were encountering were gods. When in reality, like I said earlier, they were nothing else but flesh and blood space travelers that had such advanced technologies that our ancestors perceived them as gods. So we need to keep that in mind. And also, that does not mean, a lot of people then say, okay, well then that makes you an atheist, right? Because you don't believe in God. And I said, hold on a second now. God and gods. Why are you twisting my words? Why are you saying something that I've never said? Because if you were to subscribe to the idea that extraterrestrials exist, whether they have been here or not, it is almost a mathematical certainty that extraterrestrial life does exist. That makes creation even more magnificent than what we thought so far. Because right now, according to the Bible and to the theologians, we are the pinnacle of creation. And I'm like, really? Are you listening to yourselves? You just look around us, man. This planet has gone to shit. And we are the pinnacle of creation? Really? I mean, how can you even suggest such a lame thing? It is absolutely awful to say that we are the crown of creation, because if we look at each other, if we look at what we're doing on this planet, it is absolutely disgusting. And if that truly is the case, that we're alone, then that, in my opinion, is an insult in the face of creation, because it means that she couldn't do any better, and by she I'm referring to. So, you know, therein lies the big problem. So, at the time when these extraterrestrials lived in these orbiting cities, there was this giant quarrel going on, and we human beings just happened to be in the middle of it. That's according to these ancient texts. Now, in order for those extraterrestrials to reach Earth, they used smaller type vehicles, and those vehicles were always referred to as vimanas. And the vimanas were first described as flying lotus flowers. And here, for example, in a 12th century Sanskrit romance, this 12th century Sanskrit romance was only translated in 1908, but the romance itself was put down on paper in the 12th century. But the romance itself dates to 2000 BC. So we have to think, we have to remind ourselves of that. In golden splendor, filling all the space of the firmament, a troop of chariots, stupefied by the enormous splendor of varied jewels, appeared to the ascetics in the distance, arriving from the sky. The loud chariots descended. That of Chakravartin halted at the door of the Hermitage. The others in the gorges, on the backs and the tops of mountains. The chariot of the supreme king of the Vidayaras had the form of a lotus flower, ornamented with 26 petals, which were of ruby. Now, why would I surmise that what we have here is actually a description of some type of a flying craft? Because that is a very valid question. Well, I can tell you why. Because in the following paragraph, it says this: in the morning, in the cloudless sky, the ascetics heard a rolling, which filled the atmosphere. What is it? They asked the aerial being. It is the noise of the drums of the aerial voyagers as they are enclosed in the bosom of the chariots. One hears them like a rolling of thunder, with the storm of drums rumbling by the white paths of the sky. Now tomorrow, when you look up into the sky and you see contrails left behind by airplanes, what more beautiful poetic description than the white paths of the sky? That is not a reference to ordinary clouds. Those are white paths in the sky. And the most sensational thing about all this is that they are in the bosom of the chariots. Because if it's an ordinary chariot, as you saw in Ben-Hur, in the Romans and the horses and everything, there's no bosom of a chariot. You just step on it and that's it. But if that chariot, bosom of a chariot, it's basically like an airplane. You're sitting inside the bosom of the plane, and then it opens up and you come on out. Sometimes the bosom is also translated or written down as the belly of the chariots, which is even more sensational than even bosom. And so there's this book called the Vimanika Shastra, which was compiled in the 17th century by this guy, Pandit Subraya Sastri, and it contains a whole bunch of blueprints and descriptions of those vimanas. Now, like I said, a vimana translated into English is nothing else but a flying chariot or a chariot of the gods. And so, throughout this entire book, we have exact descriptions, what they looked like. These are actually from the book themselves, and this one right here. And this is a modern-day computer rendering of what some of these things might have looked like. And these vimanas had eerily similar properties of airplanes of today. For example, they could fly so fast you could barely see them zip across the sky. Or they could be at two places at once. Or they had the capability of destroying other vimanas with these terrible weapons of mass destruction that they could just hurl at, from one end of the sky to the other and things like this. Or the vimanas were able to become invisible, for example, meaning that they had some type of a cloaking device. And then one vimana was said to have had the capability that you could hear your enemy from 500 miles away. Now, how would you do that without any type of a surveillance system or a type of radio or something? And because those are very lofty ideas that you write down that you can hear your enemy or whomever from 500 miles away. Because do we have any psychiatrists or psychologists in the room? It's okay, you can raise your hand. I'm not judging, I will actually side with you. Okay. No shrinks. Damn it, I'm in trouble later. No. But, you see, any reputable psychiatrist or psychologist will tell you that absolutely no idea can be conceived without a spark of inspiration. So when we have stories that are absolutely wild in our past about beings descending from the sky, then psychiatrists and psychologists are suggesting that because the collective knowledge of mankind was way smaller back then than it was today, that there is no way that any of these things could have been invented out of thin air. And that is very important, because a lot of people are saying, especially the mainstream scientists, they're saying that, well, of course our ancestors wrote about flying things and stuff descending from the sky because they were afraid of nature. They had to explain away their environment. They had to make sure that in order to live with nature, they had to create gods, because otherwise they would have been cowering in the corner out of fear, and all that nonsense. And I say nonsense because if you take apart that argument, it is so stupid, it's not even funny, because our ancestors were afraid of nature. Our ancestors had to make sense of nature. You have to remind yourself that our ancestors were a people of nature. They weren't like us. See, when they went outside to find out where the sun rises, they didn't have to make a figure-8 movement with their iPhones. They knew where east, west, north, and south. We don't. We have to do figure-8s. And by the way, why can't we just do circles? Why do we have to do figure-8s? It makes no sense. Anyway, so all over India, we have these bizarre temple towers. And they're also called vimanas. Sometimes they're also called or referred to as ratas. And the